everyone. My name is Courtney Lankford, and I'm sure some of you might have heard my husband speak maybe a couple of months ago here. I have 5 kids who happen to all be here. I promised I wouldn't call them up to make them say anything, but I have a daughter. We have a daughter, Briley, who's almost 16, a son, Braxton, who is 13, a son, Barron, who is 10, a daughter, Bristol, who is 8, and another daughter, Baylor Page, who is almost 4. So we have a lot. There she is. She heard her name. We have a lot going on. But so my husband, Joe, he one day, kind of in passing, kind of the same thing as you, kind of in passing, said, "Hey, Dr. Hatcher, he talked to me, saw me one time. Joey works with him at the Ag Center. And he said, Dr. Hatcher in passing said, hey, I want your wife to come and speak one day." And he said it, and I was like, yeah, it's going to be in October, something. So me and my, super gracious wife who was like, okay, I kind of shut him out, tune him out, and think if I don't respond or have any reaction, this will all go away. And so I was like, yeah, whatever, sounds good. And I never brought it up again. And literally, the Lord, as he does, I call it, or you probably heard of the confirmation of threes, which in the Bible is like completeness. He gave me 3 back-to-back reasons of why I'm standing here today. The first one was I was in a Bible study, and the lady who was talking, she said that day, she said, don't let anyone miss the awesomeness of God and that he speaks. And for me, that was just bam. It was what I needed to hear, and as I talk on, you'll probably see why. So that was my first one, and I was like, okay, Lord, I hear you, whatever. But I'm still kind of blocking it out, like, nah, not really. The second one was I was at Kairos, which is a Tuesday night thing that Brentwood Baptist does. And Pastor Chris, he said, give me the biggest reason why you're not fully following Jesus. And my word to myself was inadequate. Like, nope, I don't have it. I'm not called to speak. It's not my thing. My husband's great at that. It's not me. And God said, he said, I just want you to listen to the Lord, and what does the Lord say to you? And God said, I'm enough. So I was like, oh, I know you're enough, but really, me? Then the third thing was I actually get a text message from Joey that says, hey, you're on for October the 15th, 9:45, you have to be there. And I was like, okay, all right. So anyway, I'm here, and I will do my best. Public speaking is not my thing. It's like one of the number 1 fears of the world, and it's one of mine. So anyway, I'll kind of tell you a little bit of our testimony, and then just kind of the ways that the Lord has been working in my life and our lives lately. So I'll just kind of set up a story here. I'm sitting on my couch, green couch in College Grove on our little 7 acres with our horse barn and our 3 kids at the time. And I am on the computer, and I'm looking, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to convince God of where he wants us to go and serve. Because my husband, Joey, has heard the Lord speak to him and say, we're going to go on the mission field. And I am like, oh, really? Are you sure? And so I'm sitting here with Jesus and my computer and going to all the places that the IMB sends short-term missionaries, 3 years or less. And I'm looking at these places, and I'm like, oh, this one might be okay. We might can do that, Lord. And then I'm at another place, oh, this one might be okay. And this is over weeks of just kind of battling it out, the Lord and I. And finally, one day, I break down, and I fall on my knees, and I'm like, okay, Lord, I submit. I surrender. And so this is literally my surrender moment. If you heard his story, his was the barn. Mine was on my green couch in College Grove. His was like in 48 hours. Mine took weeks. God took a little longer with me, I guess. So I say, okay, Lord, I submit. I surrender. If you want me, as a mom to 3, almost 4 kids at the time, to walk down the streets, dirty, dusty streets in Africa with no shoes, my kids no shoes, like little ducklings behind me and a basket on my head, and just hardcore do it, I'm there. I'll do that for you if that's what you really want. And immediately then, finally, all the peace and just the rest that I had been seeking, kind of battling with God to try to get the place, he gave me that peace. He just laid it on me like a blanket and said, all right, I heard you. You submit. We'll figure this out. And so I got up and I walked away and thought, okay, I don't know where I'm going, but I feel peace. And almost immediately after that, God opened the door for us to go to Cape Town, South Africa. And so our missions pastor, Scott Harris at Brentwood Baptist, said, hey, have you guys ever thought about going here? And we said no. We had seen it on like a big screen at our church and heard a little bit about it, but missions wasn't really on our minds or hearts until kind of that end. And I said, yeah, we'll just pray about it and we'll see. And so a little bit about Cape Town is it is geographically one of the most beautiful places in the world. It is the bottom of Africa. You can't go any further without falling off into the sea. So our house was literally one of the last ones before you hit the water. Its infrastructure is a lot like here, but it's still third world. It's still a vast difference between first and third. But compared to for me having to walk with my duckling children, we were moving up. We were good. We had some more infrastructure. It's the purest cross-section of the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. So there's Maseratis and million-dollar homes, and there are 9x9 shacks with people who can't feed their kids and are striving to just get some food every single day. I said a little bit about we were 3 kids, almost 4. I think I should say this too. Probably one of the reasons that he may have had his surrender moment and me mine was we were called to adopt before we were called to go on the mission field. And I think through that calling and through God taking us outside of our box and sending us or laying on our hearts to adopt internationally, our worldview was expanded just in that. And so I think we saw that the Lord just had something else for us. And because of that adoption process, and because it didn't go like we had planned, it was twice as long. There were so many unknowns. I think that God used a lot of those unknowns of that and a lot of that waiting to help us as we were stepping forward in missions, because going onto the mission field, there's a ton of unknowns. And people look at you and say, well, where are you going to live? How do you even know when you're going to go? Because you don't even have your adoption completed yet. And so that God used all of those experiences, I think, to say, or to teach us to just trust him, to just wait and trust him. And that God is only going to give me, for us, I think he has to do this, because otherwise we would push on hard. Unless we step on the first step, he's not going to show us the next. And to just be so confident in trusting him and waiting patiently and hearing his voice and knowing when to move. And so he taught us a ton of patience and a ton of trust in that time. And I think that's what we were going to need when we went on the mission field. So I said a little bit about how Joey was called to missions first in his barn. And that day I looked at him and said, are you sure? We are really happy. We're fine. Our kids are great. Are you sure? And he said, yeah, I am. And I want to say this, that God, people have asked us before, how did you feel as a wife or as a mother or whatever? And God doesn't call the husband without calling the wife. It may not be the same time. And he doesn't call the wife to something without calling the husband. God is not a God of chaos. He's a God of peace and calm, and he is the God who binds the marriage. He doesn't break it down. And so all he did with that was strengthen our marriage. Marriage is the cornerstone and foundation representation of Christ and the church. And so it was definitely seasonal, and it was definitely at different times, but God drew us together in that. It wasn't a push apart. So I think I say that to say, if you feel like the Lord is calling you to something, and maybe not your spouse or vice versa, that if it's meant to be, God will put you on the same page, that he increases desires or he takes them away. And so he increased both our desires, and we moved forward with that. I have to have notes because I'm not so good at this. So Africa was one of the scariest and most blessed and awesome experiences of our lives. It was a totally trusting God for every single thing, every single moment, every single meal, every single dollar, every single everything. It was trusting him. And we talk a lot, Joey and I do, about if God didn't show up. It was so big, if God didn't show up, we were done. We were flat on our face. And that's the way we want it to be. We want it to be where it's not of us, that it's only God doing what only he can do. And so Africa taught us to walk in freedom and to walk in faith, and it taught us to listen and to seek at an even deeper level. And right before we left, our little Sunday school class at the time, they had started this new thing where everybody had to claim a verse. And so we were the first ones to start since we were leaving. Like, you have the verse that's going to be our verse, like, for the week or the month, or I can't even remember what it was. And God gave me the verse, Ephesians 3:20, that God is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. And that has kind of been a thread through our time serving in South Africa and even coming home, was that if you surrender, if you step out in faith to the Lord, he's going to do immeasurably more than you can ask or imagine. He's going to do that bigger, that you're not going to fall flat on your face. It's going to be even grander than you thought, because he owns cattle on 1,000, it's so big. So that was really one of our verses that we still cling to and love. Africa, just tell you a little bit about it. We had to learn a new culture. It was very different there. We had to start over. So here we are as a family with 4 kids, because our adoption got completed. We moved there. We need spoons. We need pillows. We need pillowcases. We need brooms and dustpans. We need everything again. It's one thing when you get married and you have your little shower and you have your stuff. We just rolled up in there with our little kids and said, okay, we need it all. So that was for me as a mom and a wife, okay. Whew. And we also moved a bunch of times in that transitional period just to get to the right place and how it was. The rhythms of life in South Africa are so different than here. It's very it's gentler and more peaceful and quieter. The expectations are I think people are more gracious even. It's just because it's a slower pace. And so nothing is as fast-paced as America. And when they think of America, they think of fast-paced. And it is. We move fast here. And they move a lot slower. And so because of that, slower moving, Africa is very relational. And so we learned as a couple and as a family to really dig deeper in relationships. And I think that was so cool, because you think being in the South, we're super relational, we say hi to everyone or whatever. But a lot of that is still so superficial. And there, it is deep. They immediately go deep with you. Part of that reason is that dinner times last about 3 hours. So our kids had to learn to either get up and go play or sit. It was very slow. You ate over hours and hours and hours. So you get a lot of time together that way. Spending time and building relationships and going deep was something that was so great there, and something that when we came back, we said we want to keep that for ourselves and try to build stronger and deeper relationships with friends. Let's see. Another thing about South Africa that we learned and that I feel has grown us and challenged us and expanded us was spiritual realm. The demonic and the heavenly were a lot stronger and more, maybe you're more aware of them there. So people would hear and discern. It was just stronger. And maybe it was just the different place that we were in, but we learned a lot from that. And I think that is part of the reason now that I feel like I can even hear the Lord better. It's just my time there and some of the people that we ministered with and worked with. I'll tell you a little bit now about which Joey's done, but just a little bit about the work that we did in South Africa. So he went over there. We're both in the mission field. I'm a nurse. He was in healthcare. We went over there, and he was given he was given tunnels, which are greenhouses, and a Zimbabwean farmer that taught him how to farm. And in all of that learning, we were also right across the street from a huge township of really impoverished people. And so we would bring in guys from the impoverished people into our training program, teach them how to garden, which he had just learned, and grow them and disciple them and walk with them and just be the hands and feet of Jesus, whatever they needed. And so he did that, and I juggled our kids. I did a mom's ministry there. It's always kind of been my heart where moms and babies, that's kind of what I did here. So I did that there, taught a group of women, walked with them as they tried to raise their kids. It was supposed to be moms and babies. A lot of times it was teenagers, and at the time I didn't even have teenagers. So I did learn a lot in that realm. But so in Africa, we did those tunnels, and the whole time, when you do any kind of mission or go on any kind of mission trip, the point is to start and build up those people, but to then get them to where they can take it and walk and carry it on, to empower them to do it on their own. And so we knew over time, and we had been open to however long the time would be, that God would bring in the next set of people or whatever. And he did. He transitioned a lot of people through. And as he's bringing in the people, he's also laying things on our heart back here. We had some friends who are actually here today, Al and Emily West, who came over to Cape Town to visit us more than a handful of times. And on a couple of those trips and on one of our furloughs home, God just laid on our hearts, cultivate, which Joey probably told you about before. It's growing food and growing people. And we didn't really know what that looked like. But we knew that it was something that we had learned and seen there and thought, we can do this back home, we can do this around the world. There's a great need for this, for bringing people in and mentoring them and discipling them and just walking with them in whatever their need may be. And so God started laying the foundations and the seeds for that while we were still there, which helped when you don't know when it's time to go or time to stay. But God starts in his sovereignty and grace giving you little signs of what's to come. It was good. So he started building that foundation for us. Joey had meetings with Governor Haslam. He was given land. The nonprofit status was set up. Like, things just started falling into place. But y'all, when it got to the very end, when it was like, okay, I think we're done, I asked the Lord, I was like, Lord, are you sure? Are you sure you want us to go back home? Like, we'll go anywhere in the world. It was like I had this fear, like, I don't know that I can go back home. It's one thing to move away into a culture that you don't know, but sometimes it's harder to move back into something that you know, but you're not the same anymore. We spent 5 years there, and so my life was so different, and my kids were raised in school so differently, and there's so much in my mind like clash, like, oh, I don't know. I think it's going to be harder, and it has honestly been a little bit harder to come back than it was to go, because when you're in a culture that doesn't know you, they're just like, okay. But when you come back to your own, they're like, you're supposed to be a certain way, and we're like, I don't even know. Like, I remember my little second grader, he was in school. That's Barron, he's 10 now. But when he came back, he was in his little second grade class, and that's where he started when we moved back home. And his teacher said, I just want to ask you a few questions about Barron. This is a few weeks in. And I said, okay. She said, I forget that he literally pretty much grew up overseas because he sounds like us and he looks like us, but he doesn't know about recess. I'll say words and he doesn't know what I'm saying. They all call them recess, and he sat there like, recess. He doesn't know what recess is. So there was this whole things that were just transitional for us that I had kind of feared, like, Lord, are you sure? But God, he definitely showed up, and he brought us back and provided everything that we needed in that. God just said, if you surrender and you serve me and you love everyone around you well, if you believe, I'll handle the rest. I'm not going to call you to do something that I'm not going to empower you to do. And one of my words, for my whole life, is the word believe. And any of those, not personality tests, but whatever those church personality tests that you do, mine, the strongest one is always belief. And so through my journey with kids and with Cape Town and with adoption, God would ask me this question: do you believe I'm able to do this? And literally when I was sitting here today thinking, I don't want to stand up there and talk, Lord, he said to me, do you believe I'm able to do this? Do you believe I'm able to give you the words? Do you believe I'm able to take you to Africa? Do you believe I'm able to heal your sick kid or provide food for your table? And it's so good because we come up against these things and we think, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can lead the Sunday school class. But God says, do you believe I'm able to do it? He's the God of the universe that created us all. Of course he can. So I have to say, yeah, Lord, I believe. And so it's been, that's kind of what I've had to stand on. And all the changes and all the circumstances and all the things in my life, that's what I've had to cling to, is that God, that I believe him. So God he's ready to pour his Spirit out on us. And he is ready to speak to us. And he's ready to bless us and protect us and fill us to the brim. One of my words this year is abundance. And it's not abundance in money or stuff. It's abundance in peace and Jesus and all that he has for us. And so that's just one of the things that I want to just kind of speak to y'all. And also, I wanted to talk a little bit about hearing the voice of the Lord. Because had we not heard the voice of the Lord and obeyed it, we wouldn't have adopted or gone to South Africa or even been back here to have a story. And so when I think sometimes about speaking or talking or doing whatever, that song, I don't even know who sings it now, but they have a new version of it. But anyway, this is my story, this is my song. And it's like God just says he wants everyone to share their story. We all have a story, and he wants us to share it with those around us. Everybody has something to give. And so back to hearing the voice of the Lord. Do you really believe that God can and that he will talk to you? Because so many times we kind of doubt that. That just seed of doubt gets in there, and we think, oh, I don't know that I hear you. Are you sure? But we have to stand firm on that, and we have to expect to hear the Lord, because he does want to speak to us. And to spend time listening to him. And someone told me recently, and it's something that I knew, but I needed to hear it again, was when you're praying and when you're asking God to speak to you, to actually shut up and quit talking. Because if you're the one constantly talking, how can he ever get a word in? They were like, think about that friend who's always blah, 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 blah. Like, just be still a minute and let him say what he wants to say. And so that was something that he's taught me a lot recently. John 8:47 says, the one who is from God hears God's words. And so, we should spend time listening to him, anticipate hearing him. And to not, for me, it's to take my eyes off my circumstances and off the details and just rely on him and stop and listen to him. And I want to read this. This is something that I had read recently. True blessing isn't found in just hearing God's voice, but in heeding it. When we obey, no matter how unusual his instructions may be, we create a solid foundation on which God can display his supernatural activity in our lives. And I think that goes back to that immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, Ephesians 3:20. So how cool that we can be how God displays himself. And I pray for my kids all the time. In Cape Town, we lived by a lighthouse because we were on the very bottom. And we, after living there so long, we knew how it went around. It was 3, 3, 12. And it went through our window, 3, 3, 12. And you got so used to that and so dependent on that. And God wants us to be that. He wants us to be that light that shines. And so that's what I pray over my family all the time, that we are a light. And one time I was at a Bible study in South Africa, and I remember this woman say, I see your family, and I see a cleft in a rock in the lighthouse. And I was like, oh, that's what I pray for us all the time. And she's like, well, that's what God's putting a vision of. And I was like, oh, praise. Thank you. Thanks for giving me that word. I needed to hear that. Let's see. So I think I told you a little bit about Africa and a little bit about family. My prayer is literally that we just sense God's presence, and that we keep him close, and that we step out in faith, and that we know that he's going to speak to us, and he's going to empower us to walk in him. I think now Cultivate is back here. So I told you a little bit about, we had it there. It's back here. We're working with, at Ellington Ag Center right now, and we're working not with the poor anymore. Now it's more drug addicts and felons, nonviolent felons. And I think one of my favorite things about it is that my kids can come down there, especially my boys, and they can work alongside. Where in Africa we worked alongside poor and people who are different than us a little bit. Here they can do it again, and they can see a little bit of life outside the box and be able to help and pour into someone. And I think that's so cool. What a way to raise up the next generation, being able to help those who are further ahead. And so I think that's one of my favorite things about Cultivate here, is just how the families can be involved too, and walk alongside. But yeah, my prayer is just that we hear Jesus, and that we're ready to step out and obey him, that we listen and that we act, and that we know that God, as we do know that God's always with us, but that we take comfort and peace in that, and that he just sets our lives afire, and that we can be that lighthouse on the coast and have faith in him, and that he can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. And that was a lot of stuff, probably pretty fast. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to ask or add or say? Go ahead.
Could you expound a little bit more on noticing the difference between darkness and light in Cape Town?
Yeah. I think I feel like Africa itself, just culturally, they hang a lot onto generational curses and things that are carried down from previous generations. We would literally pass people that you could look into their eyes and almost sense demonic presences, really. And then on the other extreme, people would speak things into your life, like the lady I didn't know very well who said your family's a lighthouse on the coast, and it's something I had been praying in my heart but never shared. But I think the reason that the darkness is more evident there is because they speak it. They say, well, I can't. Like the women that I helped in the women's ministry, they believe that their grandparents and their aunties and those before them passed things down to them that weren't true, but because they were passed on down, they clung to those. Or Joey had a guy who couldn't step foot in the church because he believed that his family had told him, if you do, you'll die. And so I think it was more professed there, so they knew, and it was more evident. You walk around here a lot and you don't see demon-possessed people, but we had a guy that walked down our road all the time, and it was one of those obvious, like, your spirit, whew. Did that help a little bit? Yeah.
I've always sensed it was more subtle here.
It is more subtle. I feel like we know God the Father and Jesus the Son here, but we don't let the Spirit maybe have enough work, but the Spirit is the one that God put inside us. It's the one that His Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is the same Spirit that lives inside of us. And I think we know it, but we don't live it, and we don't act it, and we don't ask Him to speak to us. But we know this Jesus on the cross, and we know this God the Father, but we don't maybe draw as much to the Spirit as they do there, because the spiritual realm is more talked about and more out in the open. Mm-hmm.
It's because Africa is more a land of oral tradition than we are probably.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gets passed on.
It gets passed on.
Generation to generation.
It does, and it's hard to break. Like, it's very hard to break. Anything else? Thank you guys for having me today on your fall break. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I talk fast when I'm nervous, so I tried not to, but I do. So hopefully you caught a few little bits and pieces here and there. But thank you so much.